Welcome to the Jericho Force Podcast, where we learn how to integrate faith into the work that we do. Don't conform to the world's way of doing business. Transform by doing business God's way. Here's our host, my husband, author, speaker, teacher, encourager, and stewardship coach, Jason Davis.
What's going on, everybody? My name is Jason Davis, aka Mr. Fortify, and welcome to the Jericho Force Podcast. Remember, here on the Jericho Force Podcast, we integrate faith into the work that we do, and we teach and learn through the guests that we bring on how we live out our faith in the marketplace. So welcome to another dynamic episode. I'm really excited about tonight because this guest, she not only is a friend, she knows her stuff. And for many of you, we are headed into, you know it, tax season. So before we get into all of that, this woman is a powerful woman of God. God uses her in the marketplace. And let me introduce her to you. For over 50 years, Padgett has been serving small businesses all over North America. Locally, Gainesville owner Janet Kaup has devoted herself to advising entrepreneurs in an effort to provide peace of mind, maximize the business owner's wealth, and bring understanding to an area that is often difficult to understand, taxation. Padgett's aim is to provide tax and accounting advisory services coupled with full-service payroll options that allow business owners to focus their efforts on accomplishing the goals that matter most to them. The mission began for Janet in 1998 with employment at Padgett as an accounting student working at the front desk as an associate accountant while earning her degree. Janet believes in coupling a positive mental attitude with constant goal setting and measurement, alongside a strong work ethic. She purchased the County Padgett franchise in 2002 as the youngest Padgett franchise buyer to date. In 2009, she purchased the Gwinnett County territory. Janet's practice has ranked in the top 10 Padgett firms every year since 2003. And she was awarded the Padgett Office of the Year Award in 2013 and inducted in the Padgett Hall of Fame in 2014. Every year since 2016, she received the Outstanding Growth Award. In 2019, she received the Chairman's Award for Practice Growth, one of the highest honors in the company. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Jericho Force Podcast, Miss Janet Kaup. Janet, how are you doing this evening?
I am wonderful. Thank you for having me, and thank you for the fantastic introduction. Hopefully everybody's still awake at this point after that long intro, but I'm happy to be here with you, Jason.
Absolutely. Janet, I'm going to say this. They shouldn't be asleep. What they should be doing is, while they're listening to this conversation, they should be going to the website and saying, how can I get in touch? That's the type of person I want working with me in my business.
Let's hope, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
well, Janet,
it's been quite a long journey with my history with Padgett, and where it's brought me has been nothing short of God planned in my life. I couldn't have planned my own career on my own with as much grace and just excitement that God's planned it for me. He's done such a better job at putting me in this position that if you had asked me as a young adult where I would be, a really young adult where I would be at the age that I am today, I don't know that I would have been able to cast the vision for my life that it's actually that it's actually turned out as. You know, I think God's vision for me was bigger than my own, and I'm certainly thankful for that.
Folks, she's already preaching. Look at that. So that's just the tip. It's just the tip of the iceberg. You know, Janet, with all the things in your bio, people go, oh my God, you know, this lady, you know, golly, she's done so much. She's an award-winning business owner, a pillar in her own community. But Janet, tell us a story behind that. We heard some of the highlights in the bio, but what makes Janet what she is today? With your professional background, what got you there? Your bio talked about how you came up first working entry-level position. So talk to us about the journey.
Sure. I was raised in the church. I'm the youngest of 5. My mom was a homemaker and took care of us when we were little, and my dad worked in his entire life in jobs that he wasn't exactly thrilled about going to each day. And I think coming from that background of having a parent who was not exactly happy to get up every Monday morning and go to a job, they instilled in us the value of education first and foremost, something that neither my mother nor my father had a college education. So they instilled in all of us that drive to achieve that in our own lives, and really that imaginary vision of what that could unlock for us. All parents, when we have children, we want them to have a life that's better than our own, or to achieve something bigger and better than what we have achieved or what we would imagine for ourselves. And my parents were certainly no different. We didn't have a lot of luxurious things handed to us along the way, but we were given the ability of casting a vision, looking ahead to what was possible, and really that value of education. So, growing up in a fairly large family, we were always tasked with, understanding the value of our schoolwork. Academics came naturally to me as a child. I was naturally a people pleaser as well. That also ties back into how we were brought up. But it's always been our desire to do well, to please teachers, to secure that goal that we had for higher education. So coming out of that background too, we were not, we weren't spoiled in any way. And I remember spending a lot of summers working in the garden, and I don't have a love for vegetable gardening today. It's tied all back to those childhood summers of picking corn and shucking corn and picking beans and hoeing the garden, and it seemed like those rows were never ending at the time. But, some of those things that we experience when we're younger do build that work ethic, that you're not finished until the job is done, and there's no throwing in the towel early. So those were some of the pillar moments of my childhood, were just being raised by hardworking people who valued education and wanted something bigger and better for their children. And we were raised in the church. My mother especially took us to Sunday school and took us to church on Wednesday nights. And so we knew, we definitely knew that there was a bigger hand at work than our own, and there's certainly a bigger hand at work than our parents. And so even at a very young age, we understood that God was there to help guide us. But I certainly never had a feeling as a young person that God would pour out all my hopes and dreams. I didn't have a vision of there being a Santa Claus God by any stretch. But when I wake up sometimes now in my adult life, I think, where did these blessings come from, and how in the world did God choose to plant me here in what I consider to be the greatest country on earth, with the greatest people surrounding me and so much support and love. And, I look at other people who were born in other parts of the world who would never be able to afford the privilege of an education, and yet here we are, in this great place. And so it does blow me away. It blows me away bigger than a Santa Claus God could possibly blow me away. And I feel very, very, very much a sense of gratitude and thankfulness for where God's placed me.
Wow. That's awesome, Janet. As you were talking, just the value of parents instilling godly values into their children, the value of work ethic and diligence and working hard, And it's something about those vegetables, Janet, that you're digging in the earth. You don't forget, and it transfers to the work that we do. Janet, you talked about how your mom would take you to church on Wednesdays. As you grew into adulthood, when was that? You're learning, you're in Sunday school, you're in Bible study, but when the Lord became real, like you said, you look back and you're like, my God, the Lord has really blessed me. But when maybe in your, maybe teenage, high school, college, like, hey, this isn't just mommy and daddy's God. Like, this is my God, and I've got to really, I've got to take steps of faith and trust and depend on Him for myself. When was that moment for you?
The most memorable time in my life when I can definitely say that God flipped a switch for me. I was saved when I was 8 years old and baptized at that same time, but I don't feel like I experienced a life-changing transformation as an 8-year-old. I do feel like I experienced a life-changing transformation right after becoming a mom. So, 11 years ago, I remember bringing our daughter home from the hospital and feeling at that age and stage in my life. I'm in my early to mid-30s, and I was very much settled into my career at the time, and was already living in a state of blessing and gratitude, and God had been with me this whole time, even during times when I was not faithful to Him. And when I along with my husband, we brought this little tiny person home, and I remember just almost having that sinking feeling of, impending doom or failure. Like, this is God, I can do taxes, and I can manage people, and I can do a lot of things, but this is a lot of responsibility, raising this tiny little human it's got eternal consequences. And I remember just even in the days after bringing her home from the hospital, having that moment of prayer where I just said, God, I don't know that I can do this. And having that peaceful response back to me. And it's one of the few times in my prayer life that I feel that God responded directly and with certainty, that it wasn't really up to me, and that He was here to help me and guide me and take care of these worries that I had built up in my mind, and this anxiety that kind of overwhelmed me. So I feel like becoming a mom was that moment for me where God really assured me that He was in control. And at that point, it created in me a deepening of my faith that hasn't been blown to and fro like, a lot of times in those teenage years and in college years, you're just kind of self-absorbed, for lack of a better word, and you're doing your thing, and I know, at least for me, there were a lot of seasons in my life where God was on the back burner. But since becoming a mom and God, speaking to me that He was not going to leave my side, and that this was a job that I could not do on my own, and He assured me that I wouldn't have to. Since those early days of parenthood, I feel like I've had that transforming grace in my life, and I have to call back on it. I have to rely on it. I have to, wake up each day and pray, and you get blown about sometimes by the anxieties and frustrations of the world, but God's always been so faithful and diligent to hear my prayers and to answer those prayers in supernatural ways, even when there are a lot of times, and especially in business, as you know, you can become worried about things and fixated on this notion that you've got to do things yourself, or you've got to be man-made, self-made, self-taught, move it forward. But that's not how God works a lot of times, and it's in those moments where we have to fall back and rely on Him where He really will show off.
So, folks, as you're listening to Janet, man, motherhood, the Lord said, daughter, here I am. Janet, there was that transformation right there. So that's powerful, Janet, you talking about that. And for those of you listening, if you're a lady in the marketplace and you're doing your thing as an entrepreneur, maybe you work in corporate, just listen to Janet's testimony, how God, really became real in that moment. And she felt the responsibility, but she was not alone. God is with us, and the peace of God, that's what came to mind too, Janet, as you were talking. I'm reminded of the scripture, he keeps us in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on him. And so as a parent or as business owners, when we experience those winds and those blowings, as you say, as those things occur, being tossed by the wind, we can keep our mind on God, and he'll keep us in that perfect peace and that double dispensation of peace. So I love just the reminder as you're talking about that with motherhood and God really just in that moment, that was a defining moment in your life. Love that.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Janet, the bio had it written all in and out. As we shift gears here, taxes, numbers. We know that you do a lot
favorite
more.
Topic.
Yes, and so, Janet, as we get into that, and as I was thinking about our time tonight, a lot of people don't even know, Janet, just the perspective. It's like, wait a minute, are taxes even mentioned in Scripture? Just and being and knowing how people feel about taxes, and then you being in the industry so long and growing in your faith, just has that even come up from a client before, or have you pondered just, wait a minute, does the Bible, is that even a concept in Scripture? Does the Bible reference that?
Yes, and it doesn't come up every day, obviously, and it doesn't come up with every client. But when you're working with clients who do want to focus on what the Lord wants them to do in their business and with their finances, we can speak transparently with one another about what Scripture does say about our priorities. And there are some people out there who believe that taxes are a conspiracy and that it's unconstitutional for our government to collect taxes from us. And I agree with what Jesus said in Matthew when he took the coin and he said, "Whose face is on this coin?" And the people began to understand what he was saying, that he wasn't a ruler that came from the government. He was a ruler that came from a much mightier place and a much mightier position. And when we take our focus off of his position and put it on political things and governmental things, then our priorities are going to get shifted, and it can be a distraction that pulls us away from what we really need to focus on. And in this scripture, Jesus says to them, submit to Caesar what belongs to Caesar. It's his face that's on the coin, and he does require us to pay taxes. And Jesus didn't come here to say, I'm above the government, therefore you shouldn't have to do these things. He came and taught that we have to prioritize. We have to remember who he is and his position in our lives. And there are thousands of verses of Scripture that have to do with finances. As a finance coach, you talk about these things, and you talk about them, throughout Fortify. And so that Jesus also taught us that we have to submit to Caesar what is Caesar's. I mean, pay the taxes that are due, and God will take care of us. If we're financially faithful to him, he's going to pour out more abundance and blessing on us than we can possibly even imagine. But we can't have it both ways. We can't not be faithful to God financially. We can't hide things, from the government. We can't not submit our taxes and think that we are going to fulfill what God would have us to do financially. Those two things can't go hand in hand. So, yeah, there's a lot of opportunities when we counsel with businesses who are serious about about deepening their faith, about being good stewards with their finances, about honoring God with their money, honoring God with their business. There's a lot of opportunity to talk about these types of things, and taxes have been around. That's one thing we always say. There's two things that are certain in life: death and taxes, and that's very true. Taxes are not a new thing; they're not an American thing. They've been around for a very, very long time. And right. There are definitely ways to manage our finances in a way that can be pleasing to God, and we can meet all of our obligations. So yes, we thankfully are able to have these conversations and encourage one another to not only do the right thing, but to also take advantage of any deductions that are out there. God doesn't instruct us to be wasteful and to pay more in taxes than we're legally obligated to pay. And I think that's where we come into the picture to educate people on possible deductions, tax-saving strategies, how they've organized their entity of business, whether they're incorporated or an LLC. So many different strategies that people can take advantage of to pay the lowest amount of tax legally possible. And that's really, that's what the government says that our job is as a tax professional. So there's definitely a balance there.
Wow. Folks, did you feel the shift in the room? She talked about her background and testimony, and then there was a shift. Once the numbers came on, Janet went immediately. I told you we were just getting started. Janet, as we continue here, and folks, make sure you're taking notes, as you're going to be able to come back and listen and get a lot of value out of listening to this. Janet, you touched on, yes, taxes are mentioned in Scripture, and Jesus himself talks about taxes. When you look at the professional landscape of taxation, Janet, you have different titles and designations, and two in particular, you have an EA and a CPA. So, Janet, talk to us about the difference between the two, and how, maybe from a confidence level, you can be confident working with that individual, just understand just maybe the difference in the designations for somebody who is involved in the business.
Absolutely, Jason, and thank you for asking this question. It's one that a lot of people are not familiar with. Enrolled Agents Designation, or EA, is the designation that I hold, and many of my colleagues hold this designation as well. It's a very laser-focused designation that focuses entirely on tax. The Enrolled Agents examination is overseen by the Internal Revenue Service, which is at the federal level, as you know. CPAs are actually given their credentials at the state level. So CPAs can actually have a broader repertoire of things that they can offer to their client base. For example, they can render opinions where they sign off on the health and wellness of a particular business. They can do audited financial statements. They can do compilations, reviews, all under the umbrella of this, of this rendering of opinion. If a business owner, I always tell small businesses especially, if you're planning to grow a business that at some point is going to be publicly traded, there will be a point at which you will outgrow the strengths and the skill sets of an enrolled agent. But in doing this for the number of decades that I've been doing it, I've yet to have a business owner who has outgrown the expertise that the enrolled agent's credentials offer. And that particularly, as referred to by the IRS, we are North America's tax expert. All of our continuing education is in the area of tax. We have to pass it was a 4-part exam. Now it's a 3-part exam. But the exam was a 12-hour exam, at the time that I took it, 4 different
12
parts.
hours, wow.
Yes. And at the time, it was given over a 2-day period, and you had to take all 4 parts. One day were 2 parts, and the next day was the following 2 parts. And you had to pass the majority of that exam in order to come back and take any missed part. and you had a certain time frame that you had to accomplish that in. And those rules have changed a little bit now. It is a 3-part exam. You can take them in pieces. But the one thing that has not changed is the fact that the enrolled agent designation is a symbol of tax expertise. And if you are interested in lowering your tax liabilities and making sure that you are working with someone who understands tax law and takes it seriously, is up to date on education, up to date on tax law changes. The enrolled agents of this country are more than equipped to handle 99% of those tax questions that are coming up in the small business realm or in the individual realm for sure.
Folks, you heard it here on the Jericho Force Podcast, the difference between an EA, enrolled agent, and a CPA, certified public accountant. And you can be confident, folks, whichever one you work with, you can be confident in them. And Janet did a good job of just describing the levels of expertise. So rather than, having a fear base, or I'm not sure, or this person says they do taxes and I'm not really sure, listen, you can take that to the bank, the description Janet just gave. Well, Janet, we know that we are coming into and is here the tax season, and we know if you are a W-2 employee, there's certain ways to lower your tax liability. But Janet, and looking at our audience here, Kingdom business owners, Christian business owners, people who are in business, what are some tax deductions business owners should be more aware of? There's ones where if you just go, I'm going to go here, Janet, Google. You just go online and you can find a lot of stuff. We live in an information age. But what are, as you tap into the expertise that you're talking about, what are some deeper things that you're not necessarily going to find on the internet? You really need to sit down with someone like yourself and take a consultative viewpoint. So what are some of those tax deductions business owners should be more aware of?
I feel like the biggest thing that business owners can do, and of course the way you apply the strategy varies whether the person is set up as a corporation or a single member LLC or sole proprietorship. So there's different strategies to implement this, but the biggest overlooked deduction that we see are business owners who do not contribute to a retirement plan for themselves. They don't pay themselves first. And what a lot of people fail to realize is that the money that you put into a retirement plan, in many cases, depending on how your business is structured, that money that you put into a retirement plan for yourself is going to give you the same tax benefit as going out and buying a new piece of equipment for your business, or, purchasing billboard advertising, or purchasing an insurance policy. The deduction is going to be the same. So rather than, trying to figure out ways to spend more money in order to lower your profit, start with paying yourself first. Make sure that you're maximizing retirement savings strategies. And once that is maxed out, then, obviously we want to look for creative ways to capitalize on money that you may already be spending anyway. We do find business owners from time to time who have minor children who are working for them in their sole proprietorship or single member LLC. And there's a lot of avenues for children to be paid in a business. And it doesn't mean that if you have a roofing company that you're going to put your 5-year-old on the roof with a hammer. Kids can do a lot of things at very young ages. One of the things that children can do are taking modeling contracts in your social media campaigns. I mean, who doesn't like to show off their child from time to time as social media allows us to brag a little bit on our little ones. I mean, that's a great way to pay that that child as a model, a reasonable amount for the work that they're doing. Shift income from the parent's tax bracket down to a sometimes tax-free bracket if you are a sole proprietor or single-member LLC with a minor child. Even as an S corporation shareholder, you can even pay family members, younger family members, and it's not tax-free, but you're still shifting income down, presumably to a lower tax bracket in a lot of cases. So that's another area where a lot of people overlook the value of this deduction. And you have to look at each situation uniquely, because there's some tax law changes that took place in late 2018 that have diminished the value of some of our traditional approaches. And I think that's one of the benefits of working with a tax professional is you're working with somebody who's staying on top of these changes. And when a strategy is no longer delivering the outcome or the benefit that it once did, you've got somebody to weigh that objectively, looking at your particular circumstances rather than giving you generalizations, which is what you can find yourself on Google. So sometimes the generalizations don't pan out, but paying yourself, looking at paying your family, those are two big tax deductions that business owners should be more aware of. A lot of people think about, the family car or, the obvious things when it comes to business tax deductions. But sometimes it's who you don't pay. It's keeping that money under your roof and in your family, and figuring out a way to be creative in that regard.
Absolutely, Janet. I love it. Folks, if you didn't write that down, you certainly need to. And more importantly, you need to be giving Janet a call. So there's a lot of gold there. Janet, as we think about tax season, there's the infamous, if I can say, April the 15th date. However, when we're thinking about when we should file, for business owners, obviously that's a big date for many people, maybe if you're W-2 especially, but when you think about a business owner or an entity, what's just some general advice on when we really should be filing our taxes?
So the tax return, the due date is April 15th on a typical year. This year is April 18th due to a holiday that takes place on the Friday before. So you have a few extra days, not very many, and I don't know who wants to take Easter weekend to work on their taxes. So let's say April 15th on a typical year. That's for the filing of the tax return. And many people who owe a balance due, which if you're self-employed and you're profitable in your business, you're not a W-2 employee necessarily, so you're not paying in your tax obligations each time you get a paycheck. You have a payment and a filing requirement for estimated taxes. So it's more of a payment deadline than a filing of an actual form, other than the coupon that associates that payment with what tax year it belongs to. And a lot of these can be done electronically now, but there is a quarterly payment guideline. And this does take place every quarter throughout the year. And if you're working with a tax professional, they can either give you some estimates to pay based on last year's profits to keep you from paying any underestimated tax penalties. That happens when you haven't paid in enough compared to what you earned the prior year. So to avoid those penalties, you need to pay in at least as much as you owed the last year. But one of the things that we work with our clients on is setting a budget so that every deposit that comes in, you're earmarking a part of that for tax. Because as we said at the beginning of the podcast, the two things that never change are death and taxes. And even death doesn't avoid taxes. So we want to be sure that whether we enjoy writing those checks or not, we are prepared for it, and we are taking responsibility. And it's a whole lot easier to take a percentage of today's deposit and put it into an account and earmark that for the government when we know we're going to have to pay it eventually. It's a whole lot easier to do that as we go throughout the year than to wait until the springtime and try to come up with a whole year's worth of tax at one time. So being disciplined to help help budget. And then if you're working with a professional, to really look at how the business has changed in the current calendar year compared to last year. Because it's great to avoid underestimated tax penalties by paying in at least as much as you did the year before. But what if this is a banner year? What if the economy is strong and God is blessing your business and it's growing and your profits are increasing and you wake up at the end of the year and your business has done double the profit that it did the year before? If your business did double the profit, you can expect to pay double the taxes. So if we want to be able to prepare for that on a quarterly basis, if possible, or at least to give you some tools to put into place so that you can be making those deposits into that savings account. And as you know, that we can work together to kind of pinpoint what that tax burden is going to be based on the profitability that you incur throughout the year, even if you're not working with us on a monthly basis or a quarterly basis to do a full-fledged accounting. We can help you get to that point where out of each deposit how much to put aside so that there are no surprises on April 15th or any other day of the year.
So much wisdom there, Janet, so much. My goodness. Janet, as people are working with a tax professional, and especially with some of the strategy you just mentioned, what's the difference between tax planning and people preparing returns, especially within the industry? We're seeing almost I don't want to say a consolidation, Janet, but we're seeing certain firms thinking about how can I add more value to my clients? Or if people are just, looking for a new tax professional, just explain the difference for us, the difference between tax planning and preparing a return, and then just the value that those different types of services bring.
If you want to compare that to a physician, your tax planning is your wellness visit. It's your preventive care. It's going to the gym. It's working out. It's eating right. It's doing the things that need to be done, working alongside a group of professionals to help coach you and guide you so that you can be in control of your tax situation. Whereas preparing a return is more like waiting until you're sick and then going to urgent care to get a prescription to try to fix the thing that you may have been able to have prevented if the right steps had been put into place to begin with. That's a close analogy that I can give. When we work with our clients, especially our business clients and individuals who have more complicated streams of income each year, they have, perhaps they have rental properties or multiple retirement accounts that are feeding their family income each month. When we work with these people, we want to be able to plan the correct strategy for how to pay taxes, when to pay taxes, the timing of certain things to minimize the tax burden. Preparing a return is more reactive, where the planning is certainly proactive. With business clients, I can't imagine being in business and not working with an advisor who has a proactive approach to tax planning. There's nothing less fun than delivering a tax return to someone who doesn't work with you throughout the year and they have no idea what the outcome of the return is going to be because they haven't been proactive, and then you're delivering the news of whatever balance might be due if it's a profitable business, and they're not prepared for that. I mean, it's just everybody likes to shoot the messenger from time to time, so it's not a happy engagement when that takes place, and that really is what it is. You are dealing with the messenger. We apply the tax law. We can't change your particular tax situation, only to the extent that proper planning and allocation allows us to achieve the best possible outcome. But when we blow the horn on New Year's Eve and the fireworks go off, at that point, it's almost too late to do anything about last year's tax burden in most cases. There's still a few little rabbits that are still in the hat that can be pulled out for a few limited circumstances, but most items have to be handled on, on the other side of that calendar page.
Wow. Folks, you heard it. The big takeaway there, you want to be proactive rather than reactive. You want to be on a wellness plan and not come in when you're sick. I don't know about you, Janet. I'm going to use that after tonight. I'm going to use that, and I'm going to give credit. I'm going to make sure, hey, Jason, where did you hear that? There's this lady named Janet up in North Georgia, and you need to give her a call, by the way. I'm going to use that.
I'll send you some extra business cards so you can hand those out.
Absolutely. Janet, we've had, if we look at the landscape here, we've had two different presidential administrations in an 8-year period, and then we had the pandemic. And the government did a lot of shifting, not just over the last 8 years, but even the last year and a half, 2 years. So, Janet, talk to us about how has the tax code changed? And let's, kind of zoom in more so on the pandemic, even though we know there's still some things as a result of administration changes. But how has the tax code even changed with the pandemic, Janet?
Well, the pandemic was certainly the most challenging of all periods of time in my history in this industry. And if you go on certain forums online right now, you'll find a lot of accounting practices are for sale. There is and in a lot of industries as well, people are really taking stock of their lives and deciding to make changes and make shifts. But there's a lot of people departing this industry right now. So if you're a young person out there, I'll get a plug in for the industry. The field is ripe, and if you have an interest in accounting and working with business owners in an advisory capacity, audit work and other types of corporate accounting are not the only way to go in the accounting field. So if you're a young person with some talent and excitement about helping people, this is definitely a great industry to be a part of. But the pandemic wore a lot of people out. We like many others were on webinars on an almost daily basis, waiting for tax law clarification, and laws were being passed. It felt like on a every other week basis, and when those laws get passed, they were passed for speed at a rate that no other time in our history has seen, so that they could put money into the hands of the public quickly, so that we could weather the storm of the pandemic where people were closed for business and were unable to work. And so many things changed during the pandemic. We saw, a lot of pandemic unemployment at the state levels, which was administered very differently than anything we had seen in the past. We saw the SBA equipped to get money quickly into the hands of small businesses in the form of economic injury disaster loans, like nothing we've ever seen before. We've seen economic injury disaster grants that were given during the pandemic. We have seen the federal government offer employee retention tax credits to people who continue to employ their staff during the pandemic, despite a downturn in revenue or despite challenges with supply chain. You can't get inventory in, but you're still open, and you're having to pivot quite a lot to bring merchandise into your store to be able to sell. There were so many credits that were available. The PPP loans are just another example. The Biden administration has helped to increase child tax credits and has also made that a check that people receive throughout the year rather than waiting until the end, to pick those up on their personal taxes. The economic recovery payments or stimulus payments, those were brand new during the pandemic. So, we could have a podcast just on one or two of those topics. As you can see, it's been it's been like drinking from a hydrant of learning the last 2 years for anybody in the accounting industry. So, if you do work with a professional and their turnaround time was a little slower than normal the last couple of years, know that it's not because they were, out tanning on the beach somewhere. It's because they've been trying to absorb all of this to disseminate this information as quickly and as accurately as possible in a way that makes sense to their client base. So many changes in such a short period of time, and one more reason why it's so critical to work with somebody that's professional, not somebody that's moonlighting and your next door neighbor bought TurboTax, therefore you should take your taxes to them kind of thing. I mean, it's those days I feel like are you would be taking a lot of risk in doing something like that with as many things that we have been dealt with over the last couple of years. So I feel like it is all the more reason to entrust your taxes only to a professional.
Wow. You are so right on so many levels, Janet. My goodness. Janet, as we come into, we're in the first month of the year and a brand new calendar year, 2022. What would you say, just your professional opinion, Janet, if you could put on your oracle eyes for a second, not asking you to be prophetic or anything, not asking you to be a prophet, but if you consider the tax outlook for 2022 and going into 2023, what are just maybe a couple small things that we can expect, perhaps maybe at the federal level and then at the state level? And obviously, Janet, you're here in the state of Georgia, so maybe from a Georgia perspective, and every state has different statutes and whatnot, but what are just some things that you could see happening on the tax landscape for 2022 going into 2023?
Well, there's a lot of proposed legislation that's being considered right now that will basically find ways to pay for all of the money that has gone out into the world over the last 2 years. There's no such thing as free money. At the end of the day, someone has to repay this money. It can't just be printed and sent out for unemployment and for stimulus and for advanced child tax credits and for PPP loans that were forgiven so that businesses could stay open. And all these things that were done to prop up the economy during an uncertain time is a little bit like taking a cash advance on your credit card. Eventually you're going to get an envelope in the mail, and it's going to be a credit card statement with repayment terms to that advance that you got. And it may not be, in this case, it's, we hear about forgivable loans. Yes, the loans were forgiven in many cases for PPP loans, but somebody somewhere has to pay that back. We can't just ignore that this huge amount of money went out into the world without tightening up our budgets and making sure that we have a way to sustain ourselves in the future. So I definitely feel like there will be tax law change that will increase the overall amount of tax that's coming back into the government. Now, what sector of the economy is it going to impact? I don't have any way of predicting that. There's been some pretty strong indication that certain things are going to change. Capital gains tax rates are one of those hot topic issues that we've heard and we feel may increase. A capital gain is the rate of tax that you pay on an investment that has increased in value. For example, if you bought stock and then you held that for a period of time and the underlying stock increased in value and you sold it, you have to pay tax on the difference of what you paid for it and what you're selling it for, and that's a capital gain. That rate of tax has historically been lower than ordinary income. So it's lower than what you would pay on your W-2 wages or on other income, like dividend income that you receive or interest income on your savings account, for example. So it receives a more favorable tax treatment. So one of the things that we feel like will be adjusted will be this favorable capital gains tax rate will probably be increased. Some of the other things that have been discussed, and none of this is signed into law at this point, but changes to how we inherit things. How we don't have. Typically, we don't pay a tax on things that we have inherited. The estate that we have inherited them from does not pay tax unless it is a very large estate. So there's some discussion about lowering those limits of estate tax exemption limits so that more people would be subject to what we refer to as an inheritance tax. At this point, it really is too early to tell, and I try to stay on top of legislation as it is proposed, but until it is signed into law, we can't plan really effectively without simply planning based on the law the way it's written today, because none of us have that oracle hat, that we can put on to know what's going to happen in the future. And I think that's probably the best bet is we have to plan based on the way the law is written today, and we just have to trust that God is in control and that we can be good stewards. We don't live on such a thin margin that if a tax law did change, that it's going to upset our personal apple cart to the point that it would be extremely painful. So that those are my strategies for looking ahead into the future. Is a fair amount of trust, a fair amount of prayer, and a fair amount of planning.
That's like its own sermon, Janet. Trust, prayer, plan. And then on the just the tax outlook, Janet, pretty much what you're saying is it's time to pay the piper.
At some point, it has to be, coming. Right?
At some point, right.
The piper is Janet, very poor, so eventually right. Must be paid.
Exactly. Janet, you've been such a good sport tonight. I feel like that with the barrage of questions that are going to help a lot of Kingdom business owners. We greatly appreciate your expertise. As we get ready to round out, Janet, you've given so much value here on the podcast, and I'm truly thankful for everything that you've done. We just wanted to touch on, Janet, what are some upcoming things and events that you have going on? Because, Janet, you're a community leader, and folks, this is not just, and I love the term you used earlier, Janet, she does not moonlight when it comes to taxes. She knows exactly what she's doing. And so I was just texting with her before we came on, and I said that her bio speaks boss and baller. So that's who you're dealing with.
Makes me laugh out loud.
Yes. So, Janet,
I appreciate that so much.
Absolutely. What's next? Is there any sort of events? I know we're still in the pandemic, but maybe some of those things that bring awareness to the community with tax and finance. What's coming up for you?
Well, as far as major events, we don't have a calendar of public events. We are working closely with several people in a variety of different outlets to do small group coaching and small group educating for very specific targeted markets. Realtors, for example, we have a couple of seminars coming up with financial planner in February, and again in the early part of the summer, to speak to groups of realtors who are growing businesses in that sector, so that they can be educated and aware of what needs to happen from a tax perspective, some good tax planning tips and strategies and that kind of thing. But most of what we do is more on a one-to-one basis. We like to meet with business owners and hear their specific challenges, because no tax strategy lives in a void. It has to be applied to a very particular set of circumstances, and no one set of circumstances is going to be the same. If somebody comes to me and says, well, my neighbor just bought, an F-350 and they said they're getting money back on their taxes. Well, your neighbor's income is nothing like yours. Your neighbor's business has nothing to do with your business. And I'm never going to advise you to spend money to save taxes, because even if you're in a 50% tax bracket, if you spend $1, you're saving 50 cents in taxes. The other 50 cents is just gone. So every opportunity that we have to work with business owners on a one-to-one basis to see if we would be, a mutual fit for becoming an advisor for them. That's what our focus is creating proposals that are unique for your family and unique for your business, not a cookie cutter approach to this type of planning. So we don't really have any public events necessarily, but we do have time in our calendar, and we do have the ability to meet and to listen and hopefully be able to educate and offer some solutions to people when they need it. And we are taking on new clients at this point. So if that's something that if somebody's been considering looking, at bringing in a different approach, or maybe just augmenting what they're already doing or making a change, we would definitely encourage them to reach out to us, schedule an appointment, let's get to know each other and see if we'll be a good fit.
I love it, Janet. And what's the best way for people to contact you and your firm?
Well, it's a bit old-fashioned, but we staff our telephone with good old-fashioned people. So you're not going to get a machine when you call. So you can always call our office. Our phone number is really easy to remember. It's 770-287-1040, just like the tax return. So that's a great way to reach us. You can also contact us through our website, which is www.padgettnga.com. And we also have a presence on social media through Facebook as well. And you can reach out to us, to me personally, through LinkedIn as well, if that's your preferred method of communication. But we will, once you reach out to us, we can send you the Calendly link so that you can book some time on my calendar or a member of my team's calendar. We can meet in person, so you don't have to worry about not being able to have access to someone. If you prefer not to meet in person, we offer video meetings as well on Zoom, so that's always an option if you're a little further away, or if you just are short on time or don't prefer to drive in to the office. So we like to have a lot of different varieties of ways that we can meet and do business together.
My goodness. Janet, this has been outstanding. I just want to personally thank you for coming on the Jericho Force podcast. We will definitely bring you back at some point because, like you said, there's just there's too many topics to talk about, but I want to thank you for coming on as a guest tonight, adding value and then letting people know, hey, stewardship is part of taxes as well.
It is. Absolutely. Thank you for having me, Jason. I definitely appreciate it and look forward to getting to know your listeners even more.
Absolutely. Well, folks, that wraps up this episode of the Jericho Force podcast. Remember, as you live out your faith in the marketplace, we end it just like we always talk about as a paraphrase of Romans chapter 12, verse 2. Don't conform to the world's way of doing business. Transform by doing business God's way. See you next time on the Jericho Force podcast.
Thank you for listening to the Jericho Force podcast. You can catch us live on Wednesdays at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time and on demand. Check out jerichoforce.com/podcast for more details. To learn how to live out your faith in the marketplace, grab a copy of Jason Davis's book, Fortify, Being Rooted in God's Plan for Work and Business, available on Amazon.